Make absolutely no mistake about it. Breath of the Wild was a huge success. As of March 2023, sales figures for Nintendo's marquee series topped a huge 29.8 million copies sold. The success of this game cannot be understated, but still, it left many players after completion feeling like there was a void that the game left. Like some elements were somewhat potentially missing, or not finished to the degree that the world could have been. It would seem as if those problems have been solved with Tears of the Kingdom, which improves upon but does not change entirely the concepts used within Breath of the Wild. In this video, it's those concepts that I want to talk about. The things that are nearly the same, but massively improved in Tears of the Kingdom. As I try to answer the question, is Tears of the Kingdom what Breath of the Wild should have been all along? So let's start by covering the biggest elephants in the room, and that is that the map and assets between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are exactly the same. This was made clear when Tears of the Kingdom was first announced, and then later when it was confirmed that this was being made on exactly the same game engine as the first game. It was this fact that led to outrage from fans of the series, especially when the delay was announced for the game on 28th of March 2022. After all, if the game used exactly the same map and the same game engine, then how on earth could this game take even longer to produce? The answer from Nintendo ended up being a triple fronted attack on everything we know about the map as it was. Firstly, let's talk surface level here. The surface has been much improved since Breath of the Wild. We see monsters now taking residence in places that they have never been before, such as Fort Hateno, where this mob of Black and Blue Moblin and Bokoblin have fortified the area. We've also seen changes in areas, such as Rito Village being frozen over to begin with, just to fulfill the trope of an area that was not frozen before, now being covered in snow and ice. Improvements have been made all over the place on the surface level, and if we were worried about the world once again feeling empty, on first glance it certainly feels like the improvements we crave for the map have at least indeed been actioned. There are more monsters everywhere. Seldom now do you walk large distances without something impeding you. Whether it be a giant sleeping Hinox, a fort made by Bokoblin, or hordes of keys flying out of caves at you. That's another thing too. There are what seems to be hundreds of caves littered into the ecosystem of the game, all of which have their own enemies, such as the new, insane Horriblins, who dwell exclusively in caves. And of course, Bubble Frogs, who first entice you into the cave appearing as a smaller form, before appearing as these odd blue amphibian styled creatures which seem to be the end game for most caves within the game. Then on top of that, building materials are everywhere. So if you want to take a break and build a giant rocket throne, then there's something for you to do. Nintendo have really gone to town with improving the map from Breath of the Wild, which, whilst an impressive map, certainly felt lacking at some stages in time. As we walk around, there seems to be something to do everywhere you turn. At points it can actually be overwhelming now as you spot shrines off in the distance before suddenly a chunk of skyrock drops in front of you and you feel compelled to explore what's above you. That's what this game does so well. It keeps you engaged, sometimes for hours on end, as one thing just always seems to lead to another. Speaking of the sky, again we have an improvement just in that we have another map. I won't lie, at the time of making this video I'm not yet finished with the game, but what I have played so far, I am a little disappointed with the Sky Islands. I feel like these are more exercises in getting to shrines or chests and they don't actually add a huge amount to the game. They serve as a distraction more than anything once we get off of the Great Sky Island at the start of the game. I wish that some of these islands were larger and more expansive and more important to the game, but right now as it stands, they're there to serve as a bit of extra padding to a world that doesn't seem to need them. Talking of maps, let's talk about Nintendo's best kept secret throughout the whole of the trailer process. In the first official trailer, we got to see this tiny shot of some Bokoblin in a dark cavern. We can now confirm that this area is fully traversable. We see holes in the floor all over the map, covered in a red ketchup-like mess. This mess is confirmed to be called the Gloom, and it permanently leaves damage on whomever it touches. These holes or fissures can be dived down into, and it's here that you can reach the depths as the third map. You can first do this when we get to Hyrule and Lookout Landing. After we unlock the new towers, we have a choice to go back to the lab and talk to Robbie. He is pretty easy to miss, but he will be the one that gives us the new mission and able to descend down to the depths. The depths are an underground version of Hyrule, and it keeps to a 1:1 scale of the map above. It is huge down here, and incredibly dark. All of those bright bloom seeds that we picked up are going to be used down here, as we can either waste arrows and fire them to illuminate the area, or just throw the seeds on the floor and activate them yourselves. Here we find the use for the odd trees that we saw in the trailer, and surprise surprise, they are map points for the underground. They also illuminate a wide area around us so that we can see more of the area. The key thing down here is that we need to avoid the gloom that is absolutely everywhere. We also get new variants of enemies down here that are infected by the gloom. This area is designed to help us fill in gaps with the storyline, much as the same as the etchings or runes in the floor that we now know and understand to be called geoglyphs, which are the replacement for our photo spots from the Forgotten Memories questline. These are pretty fun to explore as they are massive and usually have multiple homes to monsters in or around them in order to keep the area feeling fresh. This is just another one of those things that feels bigger and better in Tears of the Kingdom in comparison. The scope of these things that we have to climb around in order to find a tiny pool of water, and it can sometimes feel like we're looking for a needle in a haystack. Overall, the map or maps are just the first but most obvious change that make this game not just better than Breath of the Wild, but also show us that this is what Breath of the Wild should have been to begin with. Next up, we'll be talking about the main questline, and potential spoilers for within that. As usual, just skip ahead if you don't want to hear anything at this stage in time, but before we do, I'd just like to take a chance to ask anyone that hasn't already done so to smash that subscribe button and hammer the like button, and if you're feeling chatty, get involved in the comments below. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't got there yet, but this game does indeed have dungeons. They come in the form of our main questline, where we find ourselves helping the descendants of the sages in order to awaken, develop powers and aid their region as their homeland ends up under distinct threat. Many of us will have done Tulin's storyline first, as the game almost enforces that we go there first despite it being a choice that we have. During this section we are tasked the biggest and most daunting climbing task ever. We start off at Rito Village and work our way up the Hebron Mountains first, before finding these awesome Incan style structures all over the place. We first battle our way up the side of the mountain before using a mix of our climbing skills, Tulin's ability, which allows him to give you a speed boost in the form of a gust of wind, and these boats which then act as giant trampolines. We soon learn that we're not going to be able to go through the giant tornado that not only threatens Hebra, Rito Village, and has the entire area covered in ice and snow, and we're also not going to be able to go under it, but we're going to have to go through the top of it. Finally, we reach the top of the tornado and drop through to land on a giant ship. This ship serves a purpose as exactly what I thought it would, a dungeon within the game. This dungeon is called the Wind Temple, and we are tasked with opening 5 doors via Tulin's ability, before we can face the big bad boss of the dungeon, Colgera. I'm sure my reaction to the Wind Temple was the same as everyone else's as the dungeon opened up and those words scrolled across the screen. My jaw dropped. Zelda once again had traditional dungeons, but it was not to be. It was more of a tease than anything. See, the dungeons are themed to each area, as any good dungeon from any old Zelda game should be. The Wind Temple is a giant ship, with its inner sanctum being made almost entirely of this awesome looking Incan temple stone. It looks gorgeous, and I know that this is the only place where we will find this dungeon, but that's where the themed dungeon element ends. You see, we had to do this all before. Collect 5 of something in order to open a pad, which then would lead to us fighting the last boss of the dungeon. This was, after all, the very essence of the dungeons within Breath of the Wild. And I know, but there aren't dungeons inside of Breath of the Wild. There's just these giant... Oh, that's right, the Divine Beasts always were dungeons. But because they lacked theme, they all looked and felt exactly the same until we got to the bosses of their respective beasts. We just didn't treat them as dungeons. If we compare those side by side, a Divine Beast to even just the Wind Temple, you could see something immediately. This is a massive improvement once again. Just in the styling alone, just in how the temple feels, it's an improvement. But it keeps exactly the same formula as the Divine Beasts. Find 5 keys effectively and use them to access the boss. The difference here though is that the temple is dressed as such. It feels like a temple. It feels like something we are used to seeing within the likes of the Wind Waker or Twilight Princess, and as a result of this, it automatically feels like what it should have been within Breath of the Wild. It doesn't stop there though. Let's take a look at this boss, Caldera, while we're here. If I'm comparing apples with apples, let's compare to Valmeadow, the Divine Beast from the Rito area, which means we should probably compare against Windblight Ganon. Windblight Ganon, for all intents and purposes, is one of the Blight Ganons, and in this fight we got to use the wind to ride upwards using our paraglider and then go on to shoot him with well-aimed arrows. This portion of the fight and the battle against Colgera are very similar, as Colgera flies across the screen before pausing and firing icicles from one of its 3 portions on its body. These portions you will need to target once the icicles have been fired, and you can either shoot them with arrows or dive directly into them. During this fight, Colgera also flies upwards, which you can use Tulin's ability to dodge before shooting the ice that covers his weak points. This fight is very similar to the Windblight Ganon fight in premise, but in actuality, between having Tulin aiding you in the fight and him shouting quips such as "watch out" at you whenever Colgera gets too close, and the general claustrophobia of the fight, as you're confined to what is in essence a relatively small circle within the tornado, this fight feels genuinely epic. It feels like a boss fight for the ages. And the fact that this creature is designed differently and will be a one-of-a-kind battle only helps that. With the Blights, you know that you're going to get a one-on-one battle, but with these dungeon bosses, we have a massive improvement on what was originally within Breath of the Wild, and this definitely feels like what should have been in the original game. Tears of the Kingdom has 4 new abilities exclusive to the game and this game only. Or does it? I mean, did Nintendo really think they'd get away without the comparisons here? So, in Breath of the Wild we have 4 abilities. These abilities are Magnesis, Remote Bombs, Cryonis and Status. Now one of these does disappear completely, and that's Remote Bombs. And that's purely because we can create explosives with our new Fuse ability. Fuse is the only really new ability though. It allows us to merge items on the floor with our sword and shield, or combine any item to any arrow. We are able to upgrade our equipment on the go, or make giant hammers to break boulders with, or yes, make meat arrows. This is probably the most revolutionary change within the Zelda series. And with it, and the re-addition of bomb flowers. Now seriously, where did these go in Breath of the Wild, and just how hardy are these plants? They are the only flower that has grown consistently from the start of the timeline right to the end, and we are able to use them as bombs, as we always should have been able to, not giant blue orbs that just go poof. By the way, being able to make bomb arrows is a definite Easter egg, a throwback to Link's Awakening, where if you equip both bombs and the bow at the same time and press A and B together, you'll be able to fire them as one unit. A bomb arrow. There isn't really an ability like this in Breath of the Wild, but the others are without a doubt massive upgrades on what we have already had. Let's start with Ascend. Ascend lets us jump through solid ceilings. It is actually probably the most fiddly of the new abilities and is pretty specific on where it can and can't be used. But this is almost directly a replacement of Cryonis, which we used to get to higher vantage points using freezing water. As water wasn't always available in Breath of the Wild, it rendered the ability useless at some points and then vital at others. Exactly the same as Tears of the Kingdom, where Ascend can either be utterly useless as there's nothing but open land around you, or an absolute lifesaver. However, when Ascend is used, it creates a much bigger effect. We can fly through entire mountains at points, whereas with Cryonis we got to climb tiny brittle pillars of ice. On this scale, this ability is a huge upgrade, though again just not as useful as some of the other counterpart abilities. Recall literally allows you to return an object back to its starting position and stop its motion in time as it does so. If we took away the fact that it can return items back to its starting location, this ability literally is Status. Status allowed you to stop the motion in time of a particular item. You could only use it on specific items, much again like Recall. Recall, however, has a lot more use to it. See, Status was great for puzzles and that was about it. It could stop cogs or stop platforms, but in reality it was the least used ability in the game for a reason. Its biggest use in the game was to be able to use it to create leverage on an item. The more you hit the item you pause while it was suspended in time, then the further that it would fly, at a bigger and quicker rate. Recall though, this gets used absolutely everywhere. We use it on stones to take us back to the sky, we use it on puzzles, and then there's its use in combat also, as enemies use giant spike balls against us which we can recall and send back to them. This is essentially Status on steroids, which is exactly what every ability has been so far. But all of that pales in comparison to Mag Hand, our new ability that is literally the best bits of Magnesis, being able to lift any metallic object and move it around at will, but souped up to the absolute extreme. I mean, first of all, we got rid of the metal restriction, and now we can use it on nearly anything at all. Wood, metal, stone, none of it matters. If it glows, it moves. Not only does it move, but it can also be stuck to anything else that can be picked up. This means that we can make makeshift boats, cars, planes, nearly anything we can think of, and all of our creations act and react with in-game physics. Meaning that if your vehicle isn't sturdy enough to begin with, and you put too much power on it, it will just fall apart the moment it gets into movement. Oh, RIP the throne of the kingdom. But the base mechanics, the way things are lifted and moved around, it is exactly the same as Magnesis. There is no way that this wasn't what they wanted Magnesis to be to begin with. This is what it always should have been. Every ability is just that. It's their counterpart from Breath of the Wild, but what they should have been, the very best versions of themselves. Those 3 points are just that. 3 points that prove without a shadow of a doubt that in this game, Nintendo's magnum opus in the Zelda world is at its very best what Breath of the Wild really should have been. There's no big empty land in this game despite the size of the world. There are dungeons, but they are incredibly similar to the layout of the Divine Beasts. And there are new abilities, but they are essentially the old abilities just ramped up to 100. And if I'm honest about it, it's just not okay. It's fantastic! Breath of the Wild was an incredible feat of a game that has kept gamers talking for the last 6 years. It's been rated 97 on Metacritic for a reason, and it's seen by many as one of the very best Zelda titles, but it needed something more. I personally said that I would be happy if we got more of the same, as long as we got a few things. Themed dungeons, more monster variety, and more to do in the main map so that it didn't feel so empty. This is exactly what we got from Tears of the Kingdom, and that can only be a great thing. Tell me though, what other things have you noticed in Tears of the Kingdom that have been built on and developed massively since Breath of the Wild? Get involved in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time. Bye!